Up to getting up and coming, but she's okay. I have on the screens this morning the map of where we're going to be about 800 BC. 800 BC. This is during the time of the divided kingdom. Judah was the kingdom in the south, and the kingdom of Israel is the northern kingdom. You can see the Sea of Galilee right there beside the word Israel. That's what that is. And then down at the bottom, that water would be the Dead Sea. So that's where Jerusalem is down there. It's in the south. You see Damascus, the kingdom of Aram. So that's Syria. In fact, Aram is where Aleppo is today. And you've heard of Aleppo in the news. One of the hot spots of the world. But we're in 800 BC this morning. This is during the time of Elijah and Elisha. And today's account is going to be about Elisha, who took Elijah's place. You know, there's only a few times in the Bible when someone raised someone from the dead. And Elijah raised a boy from the dead, and then Elisha raised a boy from the dead, and then Elisha's bones raised a man from the dead, and then Jesus raised a boy and a girl and Lazarus from the dead. Peter raised a woman from the dead, and Paul raised a man from the dead. That's it in the Bible. So Elisha's in pretty good company, and that's who we're going to be talking about this morning. Have you found 2 Kings chapter 6? Kings is in the history books of the Old Testament. We were in the prophets last Sunday, but today we're in the history, which means it's before Psalms. So if you go to Psalms, you need to go left, and you'll come to 2 Kings chapter 6. You got it? Stand with me this morning. Second Kings chapter 6, 8 through 20. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such and such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on that place, indicated by the man of God. The man of God, by the way, is Elisha. Time and again, Elisha warned the king. So he was on his guard in such places. Well, this enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded them, tell me, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel? You see that? He thought there was a spy among them that were tipping this king of Israel off every move they made. Verse 12, none of us, my lord the king, said one of his officers. But Elisha the prophet, who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Go, find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back, he's in Dothan. You see Dothan on the map there this morning. Dothan is where Joseph was sold as a slave. That happened in Dothan. And that's where Elisha was. Verse 14. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early in the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh no, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid. Let me just stop. How many times does the Bible say don't be afraid? 365. How many days are there in the year? 365, okay? So here's one of them in the Bible right here. 365 times the Bible says, don't be afraid. Here it is. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, Open his eyes, Lord, so he may see. The Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. As the enemy came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike this army with blindness. So he struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. And Elisha told him, this is not the road and this is not the city. Follow me and I will lead you to the man you're looking for. And he led them to Samaria. After they entered the city, Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see. Then the Lord opened their eyes and they looked, and there they were inside Samaria. God's people said, Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Okay, so what happens next? The king, and by the way, this passage just doesn't even name the king. He's not the central figure in this account, in this story. Elisha is. Actually, God is. And the king says, okay, you've captured this army. You know, Elisha asked God to blind the entire army, and God did. And so he captured them. He took them to Samaria to the king. And the king says, what do you want me to do? You want me to kill all of them? And Elisha said, no, feed them and send them home. And that's what they did. They fed them a feast, and they sent them on their way. And you know what? It worked. They quit attacking Israel for a time. Now the next chapter they attack again. But for a time, that worked. And so this is what happens in this story. Now why am I telling you this today? Because when we come together and worship God, this is not just a pep rally. It's not just rah rah, we can do it. We're dealing with a spiritual world. And what I'm trying to show us is that we live in a spiritual world. Let me go way back into the early summer when I made this statement from Einstein. I love this statement from Einstein. I use it all the time. It's in my book. Einstein said, there are only two ways of living your life. One is though nothing is a miracle, and the other is as though everything is a miracle. And so we're in a spiritual realm, but we just can't always see it. Now, Elisha was a man of God. He was a prophet of God. He's prophesying on God's behalf. He's making the axe head float. He's fixing the poison in the food that they were eating. And he's the one that the widow poured the oil until it ran out, and she was able to feed her family. I mean, he's doing miracles. He raised a boy from the dead. He asked God to blind an entire army, and God did it. And then he asked that God give them their sight back, and he did it. He's a man of God. And he could see something that his servant couldn't see. And he could see something that we normally can't see. I don't want us to ever think of God being way off somewhere. Now, we just said our Father who art in heaven. So he's in heaven. He's not one of us in that he's holy. He's separate from us. He's in the spiritual realm. We're in the physical realm. And we're trapped in these physical bodies for now. Our souls are, but our souls are spiritual. So I'm trying to work on our thinking. I want us to think that we don't just live on a physical ball in a physical universe, but that there is a spiritual universe too. And so I'm working on that. I'm working on my thinking, and I'm working on your thinking. Because I want us to see the world like Elisha's servant got to see it. Elisha prayed that God would show his servant the truth. The truth, the real world. And Elisha's servant's eyes were opened so that he could see this army surrounding them. Now, am I saying that there is an army either surrounding this building or even in here with us? Well, let's just see. Let's just see what the Bible says about that. He could see it. And he could see chariots of fire. He could see this spiritual army that had surrounded them. You've probably heard the story of the missionaries that were camped, and the villagers were going to come murder them. And Billy Graham first told this in his book that he wrote back in the 50s. This story's been around a long time. Now, by today, there's different variations of the story, and I can't trace you back to the real thing. But apparently, there were some missionaries that were in their camp. The villagers were going to come murder them. Now, hearing Carla went to the restroom, but hearing what she's been hearing happening in India, Carla's not going to have any trouble believing this at all, because this type of thing is happening over there today. But anyway, the story goes that when the villagers came to murder these missionaries, they said there was 26 big guards all around their tent. And they left. They didn't even try. Well, later one of those villagers gets saved, and he tells the missionary what happened. And the missionary goes home and he's telling his church what happened. And they said, well, when did that happen? And he told them the date. And they said, at that time, there was 26 men up here at the church praying for you guys at that very moment. So that's the story. Now, I can't verify that as a fact, but Billy Graham told it, and that's good enough for me. Okay? So we know of stories like this. Are there spiritual forces? We've been talking about demonic activity. And the man that was out in the graveyard and he was in the chains, and Jesus came and he sent the demons into the pigs. I want you to know, first of all, that the Bible differentiates between sickness and demon possession, and I can prove it. Wednesday night, here in our Bible study, we happen to read this verse. Acts 5:16 says that the apostles were casting out demons and healing the sick. And it differentiates the two. And I don't want you to think that every time somebody's sick, the people writing the Bible, because they didn't understand germs and bacteria and viruses and all that, they just thought everything was demon possession. I want you to know that's just simply not true. If you read the Bible, you just don't see that to be true. The Bible differentiates between demons and between sickness. Sometimes it is demon possession. Sometimes it's leprosy. The Bible calls it out as leprosy. Sometimes a man is laying there and he's been crippled for a long time, and Jesus comes along and heals him. And so the Bible doesn't call every illness that people have demon possession. I don't want you to ever think that. There's a difference. There's a differentiation, and the Bible splits the two and differentiates between the two. But I want you to hear what Jesus said in Matthew 18:10. You might even want to mark this or make a note of this. This is such a great verse. Jesus said this himself in Matthew 18:10. He said, don't despise, it's an interesting word, don't despise one of these little ones, talking about children. He said, for their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. Now, Jesus is telling us that children have an angel or angels who always see the face of the Father. If anyone ever thinks that someone can abuse a child, mistreat a child, and God not know about it, needs to go back to Matthew 18:10. Because they have angels. I mean, and God can see it himself. But sometimes we wonder, how does God watch over so many of us? Well, for one thing, he's got an army of angels all around us. Hebrews 13:2 says this: "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. For by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." How about that? Anybody think you've ever encountered an angel? I do. I've got a story. Back, it was the week after I graduated from A&M, so it was December of 1983. Kevin, my brother, was in Waterloo, Iowa, touring with this band. It was a Christian band, went all over the country, and they sang and they did concerts, but they were run by this corporation that was very strict, and they were kind of wacko, if you ask me. But anyway, he's in Waterloo. I get on a plane. I'm 22, okay, 1983, just the week after I graduated from A&M. Get on a plane. I fly to Cedar Rapids. And Kevin's in Waterloo. Well, that's 60 miles apart. It was 10 below zero. That's the coldest I've ever personally experienced. And the moisture in your nose freezes and feels like you got boogers in your nose, and it's ice crystals. It's a weird feeling. So I'm in Cedar Rapids because that's the bigger town. That's where the airport was, and I'm in a holodome. Kevin's over in Waterloo, and because the weather was so bad, they wouldn't come get me, and so I'm stuck in Cedar Rapids. So I'm calling Mom and Dad. I'm stuck. Kevin's over in Waterloo, and here I am in this holodome, and in Cedar Rapids, and I didn't know what to do. And so I'm kind of hanging out at the little restaurant in there, and there was a salesman sitting there with his map in front of him, and I get to watching him. I was sitting kind of at a counter, and he's over in a booth. I remember this well, and I was kind of watching him, and he had his map open, and it looked to me like he's going to Cedar Rapids. So I just walked over to him and said, are you going to Cedar Rapids? He said, yeah, right after I finish this coffee. I said, would you take me? And he said, sure. Had a very pleasant conversation. We drove through the snow. It was very beautiful. It was very cold. And he told me about his family, and I shared with him about mine, and he took me right to the hotel where Kevin was staying and dropped me off. But my parents to this day think that may have been an angel, because he was sure at the right place at the right time. Now, whether he was a supernatural angel or God just supernaturally placed him right where he needed to be right at the right moment, it's still supernatural. And I can just still see God's handiwork in that. And so we just don't even know what God is doing around us, moving messengers in and out and protecting us. And you can read so many stories of people who are being protected. Some of the forces are not on our side. Some of the forces are against us. But I want to remind us this morning that we're on the winning side, and that those who are with us are more than those who are against us. And they're stronger and they're bigger, and our God is bigger. and our God is stronger. And we just don't even know. But God is protecting us, and it's so good for us to come together and to worship Him and to acknowledge. And I want us to acknowledge that not only is there a physical world, but there's also a spiritual world. And Elisha's servant was able to see that morning and see that they were surrounded by these angels. Don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, because you just never know. You may entertain an angel without knowing it. You know, one of the privileges of being in a church body is that we come together and share in communion, or the Lord's Supper, which we're about to do. And we have open communion here. Everybody's welcome to partake and to participate. And this is a reminder to us that not only Jesus died for us to pay for our sins, to make us right with God, but He rose from the dead. And we must never get too far from that. We must always preach Jesus, Jesus crucified, and Jesus resurrected from the dead. And so this morning we'll celebrate communion together. If our elders would go ahead and hand out the bread and the cup.